After I wrote the Eden Conspiracy, the fourth in the Eden series, I had banked on having a bit of a rest before going straight into another book. But so much happened in 2023 relating to extraterrestrial contact in the present that I couldn't avoid the topic. My previous books have really focused on the past. People know me as the paleo contact guy. That's the hypothesis of ET contact in the deep past. But 2023 was an extraordinary year, and I found that I was receiving a lot of correspondence from people asking for my comment. How do we interpret what's happening in this fistfight between the US Congress and the Pentagon regarding the program? Now, the program, in case anyone doesn't know, is the Pentagon's R&D unit's work in reverse engineering materials obtained from UFO or UAP retrievals. We weren't supposed to know any of that was going on until in 2019, the Pentagon stepped forward and says, yes, we have had units in place for more than 70 years doing that work. So that was earth-shattering enough in 2019 to hear that officially acknowledged. Then followed 2021, where we had the Senate briefing paper telling the public that on average, once every 6 weeks, US military activities are interfered with by UFO encounters. That means mass sightings, technically speaking, once every 6 weeks. So yes, there's something to see here. But in 2023, the information that came to light was extraordinary. It was like nothing I've seen in my life before. All of a sudden, on July 26th, 2023, the House Oversight Subcommittee, 3 witnesses, Ryan Graves, David Fravor, David Grush. Their sworn testimony indicated that the Pentagon units of the program know the location of entire craft that have been retrieved, what materials were retrieved, when and where, the names of the people who've run the program over the last 70 plus years, and the names of the Pentagon officials who blocked disclosure over the last 70 plus years. Now, the details of that weren't made public, but the fact that that information exists was made public. What do we make of this? Is the contact that's being implied today the same as the contact our ancestors described? Is this something that should worry us? In that hearing, we heard from Congressmen Andy Ogles and Tim Burchett asking questions about whether there's an existential threat hanging over planet Earth. Is this a national security issue for the USA? And there's that note of alarm in that conversation. And people were asking me, should we be alarmed? Or is it actually good that we're in contact? Contact in the deep past wasn't all invasions and annexations. Many ancient stories speak about great leaps forward in the human story through contact. Is that what we're looking at today? And I thought, I can't leave this alone because this is such a change in the public conversation. And our ancestors have prepared us for this moment. And so in the Invasion of Eden, I go back to ancestral wisdom, to indigenous story from all around the world. I go to ancient Armenia. I go to the Trossachs of Scotland. I listen to ancient African story. I listen to ancient Hawaiian story. And across all these ancient stories, there is a coherent picture that has been given us to prepare us for moments like these when present contact becomes unavoidable. If we listen to the story of Hermoshed, the brigadier general who for 28 years was Israel's chief of space security, he speaks in his book, The Universe Beyond the Horizon, about occasions, and many people listening to this know this story, occasions during the Cold War when nuclear warheads were respectively armed and disarmed by an unknown intelligence. And at the very least, that shows us that our visitors, our observers, are interested/concerned about our possession of that kind of technology and how we might use that. So I think that if they can switch our weapons off, and if we can't even catch them up, I don't think we're a threat to our visitors. I'm actually bringing the two worlds together. So I'm doing what I've done in my previous books, touring the world for ancient story and finding the patterns and bringing those to light. But then I also had to be really assiduous in my contemporary search. First of all, to get it right. I'm writing about people who can write to me or who can post about me. So I have to be fair and accurate in how I'm reporting what they've done and what they've said. And it does take a lot of work to get that research correct. The other aspect is to calculate how fast is this story moving. That information being allowed out of the bag by the Pentagon indicates quite a fast-moving story. And I should point out, I said there were 3 witnesses on the stand in that hearing, but everything they said had to be cleared by DOPSA. That's the Department of Defense's Office of Pre-Publication Security Review, and had to be approved. The scope of the conversation had to be approved by ISIG. That's Thomas Monheim, the Inspector General of the intelligence community. So you're actually listening to a community of people when you listen to those 3 witnesses. So it's far more of an official disclosure than one might at first have thought. So it's a fast-moving story. And the Pentagon seems to be doing this 2-step kind of pattern of disclosure. So in 2017, we had the unofficial disclosure of the Tic Tac footage from 2004 when the USS Nimitz engaged with these Tic Tac shaped craft. It was leaked by Chris Mellon, the former Assistant Secretary of Defense for Presidents Clinton and George W. Bush. And he's still a free man walking around. He's not been put in jail for breaching the official secrets laws and breaching NDAs. So we can gauge it was a semi-official disclosure. And then for 2 years, the Pentagon could watch people's response as we watched that footage on YouTube and on TV channels around the world. And there was no blind panic, such as we're seeing in the 3-body problem. And since there was no panic, 2 years later, they can step forward and say, yes, we authenticate that. That was real footage. That really happened. Then there's the next semi-official disclosure when people like Lou Elizondo step forward and say, yes, and I led one of the units within the military intelligence community that's involved with the program, that's involved with crash retrievals. And we start hearing from physicists like Eric W. Davis. Yes, I briefed those organizations. Jacques Vallée, the eminent physicist, Gary Nolan, Nobel Prize nominee, microbiologist, saying this is the work we're doing on the program. There's no blind panic. There's more information being revealed. I think the information that was referred to in the hearing, we're going to get an official disclosure of that probably around 2026. Go back and listen to the hearing, and every time David Grush says, I can't answer that publicly, that would have to be in a skiff. I think a couple of years down the line, we're going to be hearing semi-official, official disclosures regarding those questions. And that really is going to be earth-shattering because we already know the information is there, the existence of entire craft and their pilots and other mysterious non-human biologics. The obvious question is, are they alive? Are we in conversation? Are we in collaboration in the way Brigadier General Hamish says we are? I think that's going to come in 2026. So it's moving very quickly. So not only did I have to get it right, but I had to bring it as much up to date as possible to prime people for everything that's in the pipeline. It is, I'll show you, it's the thickest in the Eden series. It's the longest book so far to do justice to everything that's happened and show the connections and be fair to how complex the questions are that arise from our current situation. How can we know you and me, the general public, who are we in company with at a covert level? Who are the factions? How many factions? Who's in conversation? What interests are being served by the decisions that are being made? I have an old-fashioned faith in democracy, and I believe that decisions that affect all of us go better when there is the light of public scrutiny and accountability. And so another purpose behind the invasion of Eden is to do that, to shine a light on the program, to help people connect the dots, and to encourage people to let their media outlets know that we want this story pursued. We want to know where the program is up to. We want to know about present contact. We want to know how Boeing and Raytheon and Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin and Skunk Works are going with their reverse engineering. Because by my reading, the moment they succeed in reverse engineering these exotic materials, that's when the human story changes again. Because all of a sudden, we will be spacefarers. This is what Jacques Vallée and Gary Nolan and Eric Davis have told us. The materials they're working on were engineered outside of Earth's atmosphere in zero G with unique isotopes that appear to have an impact on space-time. They appear to create a little space-time bubble around them. What that implies is that these materials, the materials from which our visiting craft are made, it's the materials that enable them to ping from one part of space to another. As soon as we have that, we become spacefarers. And we change from being the observed, the studied, the abducted, to being fellow spacefarers. Now, Brigadier General Haymashed says that's the technological bar our visitors/overseers are waiting for before all the rules of the game change. And I think you and I are hungry for that moment. We've had leaps forward in the past in material science, but none as far-reaching as this. What would it mean if we suddenly had access to the cosmos? What would it mean if suddenly we had access to free energy? So much of our world politics and our global economy would shift in that moment, potentially in a very welcome way. But this is why I say we need the light of scrutiny and accountability over what's happening, so that the changes that follow are in all our interests rather than the interests of the 1%. Contact experiences are not the monopoly of covert government or covert military intelligence. They're not the monopoly of Department of Defense. Contact experiences are happening all around the world. There are mass sightings all around the world that involve ordinary people. And I think the rate of experience of close encounters at an individual level, at a mass sighting level, I think there's been a great acceleration of those, which I find very reassuring. If I thought that people had traveled light years to come and support the progress of human beings, but they were only talking to military intelligence, I would be a bit worried. If I thought that people had made these interstellar journeys and were making decisions behind closed doors only with the corporate leaders and political higher-ups, again, I'd be a bit concerned. But my research suggests that's not the only place where contact is happening. It's happening at every level, as it always has done. And I think our visitors are more intelligent than that, that if they want to understand humanity, they engage with humanity at every level. And when we listen to indigenous story around the world, that is the report. They all have different language for it, different images for it, but the picture is the same, that you and I and everyone on the planet lives in a soup of company, and that contact experiences are part of the human experience. When I was researching for Escaping from Eden, it blew me away to realize that in the New Testament, the writer of 1 John fully expects the early Christians to be having contact experiences. And he talks about contact with spirits, but he never defines what he means by spirits. But in ancient cultures, spirit doesn't necessarily imply a transcendent being with some religious agenda. It doesn't imply a disembodied or energy-based being. A spirit can just be someone who's turned up on your property and you don't know how they got there and you don't know how they disappeared. A spirit can be somebody who can travel from the moon to planet Earth like that and then travel back. Those are the associations around the word spirit in many cultures, but he never actually explains himself. More important to him is that the hearer should keep their thinking hat on, not believe everything they're told automatically, not do everything they're told automatically, but to ask themselves, does that make sense? Do I think that's true? Do I need to do anything about that or not? So it's a fascinating text where the writer is saying, keep your sovereignty. And if you're willing to do that, when you have these experiences, you're going to be getting some good information. And I think that's true as much today as it was then. The thing I didn't expect to find was a sense of what it was that concerned our ancestors about beings turning up from outer space and beginning to run the show. I didn't expect that they would talk about shifts in culture, that this is what we should be concerned about. We shouldn't be concerned about, Star Wars in space or air battles with tic-tac craft. Their concern was, has a new layer of covert government arrived that is shifting geopolitics in an unhealthy way? And so when I listened to the story of the Mo'o, the Hawaiian story, the invasion of the Mo'o, what happens there is the Mo'o arrive and they annex the land, they divide it up amongst themselves so that the people are now detached from the land, they're no longer self-sufficient, they can no longer work for themselves or work for one another, they have to work for money, for the tokens that the invaders will now provide, but they have no control over the value of that money. So it can be devalued. They can't get any more hours in the day or days in the week, but they're going to have to work harder and harder just to get tokens that are worth the same as they were last year. And this is a form of enslavement. And so what happens is there is a new layer of control over human population. So that's in the story of the Mo'o. In the story of the arrival of Awanas and the Apkallu, we have the introduction of the money system and the urbanization of population. So again, they're moved off their land. They can't work on the land. They're now living in a city. They have to work for money. So you now have strata of those who issue the money and those who have to work for it. Those who make the laws, those who have to keep the laws, those who exact the taxes, and those who are in perpetual tax debt. And that's quite an interesting sort of cultural story told by the ancient Babylonians. The same shifts are there in the Bible as well, I realized. And I went back and I found in Psalm 82 and Deuteronomy 32, very similar stories, the arrival of the Elohim, the Tseva Hashemayim, the sky armies. The Elohim means the powerful ones. The El Ba'adat, the power council or council of powerful ones. What do? They annex the land. They divide it up among themselves. Now the people on that land work for the Elohim who owns that land. It's there in the stories of Odin as well. Odin comes from ancient Armenia with his horde of advanced people. Why are they so advanced? We're not quite sure, but they're so advanced they can travel into Northern Europe and divide up the land in exactly that same way. And so these stories tell us that if we are seeing changes in our geopolitics that are disempowering people, making it harder and harder for us to be self-sufficient, to live off our own land, movements of urbanization, increased modalities of management and control, and urbanization serves that purpose, then we should ask, why are those decisions being made? In whose interests are they being made? These are all the signature moves of a new layer of annexing government. And it's a story that we've heard before. So if we go to the 1600s and listen to Robert Kirk, who wrote the book, The Secret Commonwealth, and that was on the basis of indigenous story from out of Scotland. He said, when you see political decisions being made over a long term that appear to have no sense of compassion in them, no sense of fellow feeling towards ordinary human beings, well, that's a clue that those pulling the strings don't have any fellow feeling with human beings. That's why those policies look like that. And it's not hard to find policies that are really very damaging for ordinary human beings, but are being done because they make economic sense. And the moment you use that kind of language, if you can say the economy is strong, but half our population are homeless, then you need to start asking, what do you mean by the economy then? Whose economy are we talking about? And so these are the motifs to look for. Uber policies that last for generations, that harm human beings, that have no compassion in them, that increase the ability of the higher-ups to control and manage populations, that infantilize the general population, disempower them, meaning that they're perpetually working for the higher-ups to pay off their tax debts. We become so accustomed to that, we think, well, that's just life, isn't it? And our ancestors say, no, these are the kind of changes that happen when you are conquered. They happen if you're conquered by a foreign power, but they can happen if you're conquered by an extraterrestrial power who aren't the kind you should be in conversation with. And in the invasion of Eden, I asked the question, who are we in conversation with? How many factions are present right now? And are we leveraging the situation to our benefit? Are we bound by decisions that were made in the 1940s under President Truman with the factions who were here then? And are those agreements still the best to serve us in the present? I believe that our ancestors wanted us to know that help is always at hand, that ET Company that is very interested in humanity and supportive of humanity has always been a part of the picture. And so we need to be very intelligent in who we're doing business with, in how we're doing our interstellar diplomacy or our exopolitics, to use that word. And we need to be bringing our best emotional intelligence and our best minds to those conversations. And it's why I think framing the whole specter of contact with alarm is not going to help us. If we frame this as a story of war, we're not going to come off the better for that. We need to be engaging far more intelligently with all the company that's there to ensure that what happens next gives us the best possible outcomes for the human race. Something that really did grab my attention in my research for the invasion of Eden, this pattern where you go from working for yourself, working for one another, to working for money. Here's a statistic to show you the vulnerability of people who've been forced into that shift. The British pound, sterling, I mean, wow. Could I name a more powerful currency than that? Between 1800 and 2023, the pound that everyone was being paid with was devalued by 99.032%. And I don't imagine for 1 minute that wage growth has kept up with all those changes through all those ages. But it hasn't been all bad, but you just see the vulnerability when you are now working for a currency that you can't control, you're very vulnerable. And of course, it's why in the present we're seeing this great move into cryptocurrency, because people want to hold their wealth in ways that cannot be suddenly redefined by bankers or government. The wisdom to answer those questions is in the ancestral narratives. It is in the story of the Mo'o told by Hawaiians. It is in the story of the Elohim told in the Hebrew scriptures. It is in the story of Oannes and the Apkallu told by the ancient Babylonians. I think when we are hungry for understanding and what's on the TV isn't answering the question for us, that doesn't leave us bereft. ancestors have ensured that we have the preparation to deal with the present. Contact is not just an elitist exercise, it's for all of us. The breakthrough in the program isn't just for military intelligence, it's for all of us. Contact with our neighbors is not just for covert government, it's for all of us. And in the Invasion of Eden, I talk about how we can begin to open this up as part of the human journey rather than a story of privileged information. Governments always want to control the flow of information because they want to control the reaction to the information. So I don't think that's going to change. And so I think on the one hand, that means a degree of skepticism is always in order. But I mean, I had people contact me who were 100% skeptical about that hearing and said, we're being played. This must be misinformation. I think that's a mistake. I think that was an act of disclosure, and we need to push that as far as it will go. I think not only skepticism is in order, but accountability. And I think we need to support our journalists, support our media outlets to pursue these stories which are of interest to us and shine as much accountability as we can on these processes, to be told that the program exists and what it is we're trying to do, and then just leave it at, oh, well, they'll tell us when there's something we need to know, is ridiculous. We're citizens. Let's play our part in the conversation. Let's keep the conversation moving forward. And so I applaud my fellow Australian Ross Coulthart for what he's done in pushing the conversation forward. Not to disrespect the contribution of Tim Burchett and Andy Ogles, I applaud them for pushing the conversation forward, because although they're sounding the note of alarm, what they are saying is this is everyone's business. This is the business of Congress. This is the business of the American people and, by extension, the citizens of the world. We need to push the conversation forward, not shut down because we have to filter or weigh what we're being told. I understand people can be very skeptical and cynical about anything that comes out of Washington. How can you take that seriously, Paul? But I think if you take that view, you're going to miss something incredibly important. It's not that you have to be credulous, but don't miss what just happened. How far forward are we behind closed doors with our technology? What's been said in public is that we know what we're trying to do. We're trying to replicate these isotopes, recreate this fabric, this material that creates a little space-time bubble. And that's the beginning of being able to achieve travel through space, through subspace, through artificial wormholes, to use that analogy. If that's what we know in public, how far forward are we behind closed doors? That's the $64,000 question. When the Pentagon decided to privatize the program, to subcontract this R&D work, it created an economic incentive not to disclose. I mean, if you're a corporation that can soak up trillions of dollars of unaccountable money from year to year, as long as you're working on the program, then your advances in that work, any breakthroughs you're going to reveal in as slow and piecemeal a fashion as possible, as long as you're on the receiving end of all that cash, because corporations exist to make money for their shareholders. I think the only way around that is accountability, is the light of scrutiny, is for the message to be loud and clear from month to month, year to year. This is all our business. This breakthrough belongs to all of us. My perspective is this: people say, oh, we're not ready for it. But if our ancestors were able to live in a world where they understood there was an ET layer to human governance, if they could cope with it, if they could handle it, why on earth wouldn't we be able to? I think we often infantilize ourselves when we talk about contact in a way that we do not need to. We are the human race. we've been in contact before and we've been in contact constantly. We need to take responsibility for the world in which we live and not say, oh, well, look, the 1% are running everything, I can't do anything about that, or covert governments running everything, I can't do anything about that. I don't think that's the whole picture at all. And there's a great deal you and I can do to define our own lives, which we won't do if we're in a state of alarm or in a state of despondency. And so in the Invasion of Eden, I want to give people reason not to be despondent, not to be alarmed, but to be bold and hopeful and creative as we chart a way forward together. I think another little glimmer of hope is realizing that the Pentagon understands that there is now increased pressure for transparency and accountability. So when Sean Kirkpatrick was moved along from being the head of AARO, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, he was replaced by the Deputy Secretary of Defense, Kathleen Hicks. And in the statements around that shift, those statements were full of the word transparency. We applaud Sean Kirkpatrick's commitment to transparency. I will continue our commitment to being transparent with the US Congress and with the public. And I don't mean to be disrespectful, but the idea that the purpose of secret services is to be transparent with the public is some kind of a joke. Language of transparency is being used reflects they are feeling under pressure, that there is a growing wave of demand for transparency around contact and around the program. And I'm glad they're feeling that pressure because we need to be part of this conversation. And I think it's very easy to get trapped in a place of exasperation as well, where we feel that our intelligence services are our enemy or the aerospace corporations are our enemy. I don't think that's helpful. I wish the aerospace industry every success with the program, but with the addendum, its success is all our business. And I wish military intelligence success in their endeavors insofar as they serve the public good. But to demonize people isn't going to help you get into a conversation with them. And I think the message we need to be giving is not, we're very angry with you for the secrets you've been keeping, but rather we are ready to be brought in. We are ready to be part of this conversation. And since it's our money you're spending, we think we're entitled to that. In the Invasion of Eden, I go to some very interesting places. And one of the most interesting is the Lake Van district of Turkey. And I look at some artifacts that belong to an ancient culture that was so devoted to the ancient stories that define that culture that it found a way of carving reliefs into basalt, which is impossibly hard. With Iron Age and Bronze Age tools, I just don't know how you could do it. But somehow they created these reliefs that they knew would last for centuries and maybe millennia. And the scenes that they carved suggest contact that is not alarming, but inspiring, that is not terrifying, but awe-inspiring. And so we see figures who are clearly advanced beings on planet Earth with something to offer, with this pine cone that represents a receding or higher cognitive abilities or higher wisdom, with this handbag of, well, what is that? Is that technology? Is that something medical? But the scene tells you this is something advanced. This is something we didn't have before. And then emblems of seeds that suggest an ecological receding, and then visions of ziggurats that suggest contact beyond the familiar, beyond the immediate, beyond this space, beyond this time. And this has been carved so exquisitely and with such a sense of balance and symmetry. There's no way you could look at that scene of contact and say, well, clearly the message there is if we ever see anything like that, we should bomb them out of the sky. Now, this is something we should never forget. This is something extraordinary that happened to humanity. And I believe the potential is there from our current contact for humanity to experience a new great leap forward, something further reaching than we've ever achieved before. That's why I'm excited about contact. I'm not naive about it. There are always potential threats, and there's always the potential of visitors who are not interested in human welfare. And the clues are there that we've had that kind of contact. But listen to the big picture of ancestral story, and the potential is that the human experience can elevate in ways we have not known before. And that's what excites me.
The Invasion of Eden, available on Amazon, in paperback only, from April the 9th, 2024. Did our ancestors warn us about ET invasions and its history repeating itself in the 21st century?